19th century politics. What I want to do in this video and a few others I'm doing, I want to talk about some of the lesser known 19th century presidents. We know Lincoln. He's worshipped and talked about all the time, and then people tend to talk about historians tend to talk about Ulysses S. Grant, maybe Hayes, and then we tend to skip to Theodore Roosevelt. And there's several presidents in between, Lincoln and at least Hayes and, Roosevelt, Theodore. And so what I want to do is talk a little about some of those kind of lesser known presidents. The first I want to talk about is James A. Garfield. He's the 20th president of the United States. He was born in Orange Township, Ohio in 1831. Historians, we tend to like that American dream, rags to riches story, that log cabin campaign, and Marxist historians like to talk about class and people being poor and moving up, but and so historians tend to highlight James A. Garfield. He was born in a log cabin, so there's that log cabin campaign. What it means is he was born poor and was raised by a widowed mother. He worked his way through life and college. He went through Williams College, graduating in 1856. He was a teacher. He later became president of Western Reserve Eclectic Institute. It's now Hiram College. Like many men of his generation, he served in the Civil War. He joined the Union Army. He rose to the rank of Major General. A couple of major battles he served in was the Battle of Middle Creek and the famous Battle of Chickamauga. During the Civil War, he was elected to Congress as a Republican. He was elected in 1862, and he was in Congress until he ran for president. James Garfield's main political platform was support for Reconstruction. He was a supporter of civil rights and maintaining them for newly freed peoples. And he advocated sound monetary policy. And we talked about that a minute ago. Sound monetary policy, gold standard, no paper money. So he advocated the U.S. economy should be based on sound fiscal policy. The election of 1880, so the Republican Party in 1880, you had the end of the Civil War, the end of Reconstruction. Historians generally view Ulysses S. Grant's presidency, 2 presidents after Lincoln, is corrupt. And then at the time, by the end of Grant's term, it was generally considered that as well. Most historians excuse Grant himself, but mainly it's who he put around him that tended to be what was corrupt. The Republican Party was looking, who do we nominate? Do you nominate somebody that liked Ulysses S. Grant, that liked the spoils system or the patronage system? They're called the stalwarts. A leading person in that group was a U.S. Senator, Roscoe Conkling, who sought to sought to be kind of the heir apparent to Ulysses S. Grant. Then the half-breeds, led by a senator from Maine, James G. Blaine, who favored civil service reform. So Conkling and Blaine are going into the 1880 election. Conkling and Blaine are the main people that are trying to get the nomination for the Republican Party in 1880. And both the stalwarts and the half-breeds, those 2 teams, they're strong enough they can keep the other guy from winning the nomination. A compromise candidate, James A. Garfield, gets nominated as a compromise candidate, somebody that would be acceptable by both the stalwarts of the party and the half-breeds of the party, and so in the 1880 election, Garfield narrowly wins and defeats the Democrat candidate, Winfield Scott Hancock. As president, he served less than a year. James Garfield will be shot, assassinated in 1880 in September of that year. But his short presidency, had he lived longer, what would have been his big policies he pushed? Number one, civil service reform. We talked about that a minute ago. By the 1880s, civil service reform, both parties talk about it. The American electorate at the time, they want government to be more efficient and less corrupt. Garfield was a firm supporter of education as a means of national uplift. He viewed his rise from poverty to the White House as a function of his education. He advocated federal funding of education, which was a radical idea for that time period. States, by the post-Civil War period, states were already funding education. You had what you and I call the public education system. That had started before the Civil War, but the idea that the federal government should really spend a lot of money funding education was somewhat of a radical idea for that time period. His support of education included African American individuals as well. He felt that education was a means of national uplift for everyone, all people in America, regardless of what their culture was or racial grouping was. He emphasized that literacy and civic participation were vital to the Republic's survival. We kind of talked about this already with him. Economic policy. He supported balanced budgets, civil service efficiency, and limited government interference in the economy. Those are all hallmarks of late 19th century Republican orthodoxy. That you believe in balanced budgets, civil service efficiency, limited government interference, and you favored the gold standard. And trying to get away from the Ulysses S. Grant administration, he was really big on trying to reduce corruption in public contracts, which was the biggest issue with the Grant campaign. The Grant administration was, who got public contracts, and at what expense to the taxpayer. In foreign affairs, Garfield nominated his nomination rival, James G. Blaine, for Secretary of State. He sought to strengthen ties with Latin America. He laid early groundwork for what later would be called Pan-Americanism, this idea, promoting the idea of economic cooperation across the Western Hemisphere. And like I mentioned a little bit ago, on July 2nd, 1881, Garfield was shot by a man named Charles Guiteau, who was a disgruntled office seeker. And you get it. Garfield's campaign is getting rid of the patronage system. So he was shot at a railroad station. He lived for 80 days, 79 days. He died on September 19, 1881. Historians argue he died due more to infection and just 19th century medicine than he did by the bullet itself. Some historians argue, it is thought by some historians that had he been shot, like if you'd been shot with 2025 medicine available, he probably would have lived. He lived for 80 days after he was shot, and so historians generally argue he died more because of the medical at the time. What's interesting is Charles Guiteau's defense attorneys at his trial actually made that argument. Charles Guiteau didn't kill him. The doctors did, and so that's kind of interesting. Even in Guiteau's lawyers at his trial, they argued that was their argument that um, the bullet didn't kill Charles Guiteau didn't kill Garfield. His doctors did, and so that is James A. Garfield.